Welcome to TechMark Pod, where we innovate, discuss, and discover the dynamic intersection of technology and marketing. In each episode, we explore how businesses can leverage both to drive growth and innovation. Meet Alvin, our esteemed host for TechMark Pod. With over 15 years of experience as a renowned marketer, project manager, and software as a service architect, join us as we uncover the unique value proposition of integrating technology and marketing strategies, helping you stay ahead in this fast-paced digital world.
Hi everyone, welcome to TechMark Pod. Today I have a unique episode, and my guest is Devon Jarvis, Dr. Devon Jarvis. So I'm going to read Devon Jarvis's profile that I saw in Mail and Guardian. And before I start, I want to say congratulations to you being named one of the top 200 young South Africans making a difference by Mail and Guardian.
Yeah, thank you. I
Right.
appreciate that. Thanks for having me on the show today.
You're welcome, Devon. I want to start with there is a quote here that says, "All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us." Gandalf the Grey. I mean, it's a very mouthful quote. If you if you read it again, you know there's a lot that this quote means, right? Okay, cool. Let me read we'll get back to that quote. It's quite an interesting one. Your profile. Devon Jarvis, 27, right? He's a researcher at the University of Witwatersrand, where he lectures in mathematical foundations of data science, natural language processing. Also leads the Cognition, Adaptation, and Learning Lab, a multidisciplinary research group exploring how cognitive neuroscience can inform the future of machine learning. Initially drawn to economics, Devon discovered a love for coding at university and has since earned his PhD in computer science, supported by the Google PhD Fellowship, Commonwealth Scholarship, and NRF Tutuka Grant. Right? In 2023, he was a visiting researcher at University College of London's Gadsby Unit, Sainsbury Wellcome Centre. Beyond research, he is a committed mentor, program coordinator, advocate for accessible science education. He co-organized the Deep Learning Indaba X South Africa and reviews for global AI conferences such as Neuro-IPS, ICLR, outside academia. Jarvis co-founded One Day Africa. The continent is arm of One Day Sooner, advocating for equitable access to medical research during the pandemic and mentoring African medical students. What drives him? A desire to equip students with opportunities he once received. Devon, welcome to TechMark Pod. This is quite an interesting profile. And I'm not done reading it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks again. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah. So I'm just going to talk about your qualifications because this leads to the whole conversation, right? So you've got a Bachelor of Science majoring in Computer Science and Economic Science, University of Wits, right? A Bachelor of Science honors in Computer Science at Wits as well. Master of Science in Computer Science, Wits. Doctor of Philosophy with research focus on intersection of machine learning and neuroscience at Wits as well. Devon, you are just 27. I just want to know, how did you manage to achieve a lot at 27? Is there a history of your education as you are growing up that you can relate to how you have come this far?
Yeah. So I guess there's quite a lot of comments on there. I mean, how I've managed to do some of the things I've done at 27 is like I was very lucky that when I started university, I found great mentors. Within my first few months, and actually friends for that matter, within my first few months at university, I fell into quite a nice friend group who were driven and kind of also like, it expanded my ideas of kind of how I should be approaching university and things like that. And, again, you kind of rise to the level of your friends, and they were all, quite, so they've all gone on to be successful people in their own right as well. So that helped me. I was mentored then by Professor Richard Klein, a little bit after that, Professor Benjamin Rossman, and then finally by my London supervisor, Professor Andrew Sachs. So my kind of stages through university, right from when I was like out of school and 18 and, had a little bit of, I was also just unsure as anyone what I was going to do. You know, I got the people around me that helped show me the way, even if it was just the next steps. You know, it was my friends, then Richard, then Benji, then Andrew, and you know, hopefully now I think I've got to a point where I'm settled, and as the profile says, I want to start being that person for other people. You know, I want to start being the mentor. So that I would say that was just the key to it, and it's not something I deliberately did. I think it was just a case of always making sure that my one opportunity got me the next one. You know, like I worked very hard to maintain my relationship with Richard, for example, which then got me to have a relationship with Benji. And then the second part of that question on like, is there a, I guess, a history of it? Like, I mean, I did well in school, right? And I guess if we go all the way back to like when I was a kid, my mom was always very deliberate about like do puzzles, do Sudoku, excuse me, do Sudoku puzzles and that sort of thing. And um, like that I think had a long-lasting enriching effect, you know, kind of throughout my whole education, being diligent and consistent. But I wouldn't say, you know, I don't think I stood out at school more than, you know, a lot of my peers, you know what I mean? Like I think I was a normal kid who did well in school, and I think I ended matric with like 3 distinctions or something, which is, you know, it wasn't in the newspapers. So yeah, I would say that like, you know, I think I really got lucky in university, and it was due a lot to the people I had around.
Wow, that's amazing, Devon. So I just want to understand, you have studied this far, and at the moment you are a lecturer at WITS, right? So being a lecturer, is it out of passion?
Yeah, yeah, completely. I mean, I think for any lecturer, there's going to be a drive. There's going to be an element of it that comes just from a drive to do that kind of work, right? I think especially in a field like computer science, there are a
Mm.
lot of different pulls in all different directions, be it into industry or research jobs. There's a lot of mobility throughout the world. So I think, you know, there's a drive to teach and lecture. And on top of that, there's a drive to teach and lecture in South Africa. Like I think this, again, I feel that the community I was in played a big role in my success. So I want to support that. You know, and that's I think a key part of it as well. And then, you know, I do enjoy the teaching side of it as well. It's just super enriching. And I think every now and again you get those moments where you realize like you are actually making a difference. It's not always in the ways that you kind of imagine, right? Like I think
Yeah.
students also engage with you, kind of take from you what they need, and that's awesome. So I think I also like being in a job where I can, to the best of my ability, just show up for people and be present. And you know, you can't always obviously do that if you're got your own work to do, but the job allows me that space as well, and allows me to create spaces for other people, which I like.
I want to talk about the augmentation of neuroscience and AI. And of
Hmm.
course, you're a computer science fellow. So I just want to understand what comes out of this augmentation of neuroscience, understanding of neuroscience, and then AI. I for one, was my first time hearing neuro AI.
Yeah, yeah, sure thing. So I guess that is also probably a research question in its own right. You know, I think that's what we spend a lot of time asking is what are the similarities, and how do
Mm.
we understand one using the other? Either the brain informs machine learning and AI, or AI tells us something about how human brains are working. So Neuro-AI is more the one direction where we look to the brain for inspiration on how we go about doing machine learning and building artificial intelligence models. And in that sense, you know, it's somewhat metaphorical. We understand to at various kind of scales what's going on in the brain. We don't understand many things about the brain, but we kind of know that there is this connection of neurons and they are sending signals to each other, and that across a whole, you know, bunch of neurons, you can represent information, and it's actually quite an efficient way of representing information. In particular, like kind of, you know, there's certain ways that it seems to naturally represent things that are really useful when you want to make your machine learning models efficient, and when you want to make your machine learning models kind of robust to changes in their environments and stuff like that. So we took that metaphor, or we took that kind of complicated system of neurons and connections, and we said, well, we're going to abstract away all of those things and build just a mathematical simulation of that idea. And this happened mainly, you know, I'd say like 70s, 80s, throughout different areas in the world. There was a team in Japan doing these ideas. There was kind of obviously the teams in the UK who are now quite, and US, who are now quite famous for having done these things. And then, it turns out that that is just a really, really good structure for information. And that's become now the backbone of, pretty much all modern machine learning. So, there is a close link between the human brain and artificial intelligence in the sense that artificial intelligence has always been drawing information from or inspiration from the human brain.
If I understand, my basic understanding of neuroscience as well, it's basically understanding maybe consumer behavior. That's what we call it in marketing. Is that
Hmm.
almost similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not there yet. In that sense, I think machine learning is more analyzing data of consumer trends, so you can use it to understand behavior. I guess the level of, I mean, this is the big debate at the moment is like what degree like ChatGPT and large language models are actually demonstrating cognitive abilities that speak to the human cognition or the real world and stuff like that. But again, I think at many, many levels and in many ways, we've modeled parts of the brain. So that we've modeled types of memory. We've modeled how children learn, for example. That's a good one. And now, LLMs are starting to show reasoning capabilities. And that can speak to, you can maybe then almost treat that LLM as an agent with its own cognition, with a huge barrier for safety, was in saying that. And then, use that to try and understand your consumers. You can, and I think a lot of people are starting to do that. They have these simulated conversations with ChatGPT to try and get their own ideas flowing and kind of actually get an understanding of this kind of very, very good role-playing agent in the LLM and use that to try and understand maybe, what consumers want from marketing. And it is very good at summarizing ideas. And so you can get, I think, a very representative, like average case consumer in that role play scenario.
There's been a discussion of, I think, with the likes of Elon Musk, and there's been a discussion of saying that if AI goes unchecked, can become, a risk to humans
Mm.
or dangerous. What's your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly think we need to be careful. And there's whole teams of people at BITS at the moment working on AI safety, and alignment problems. And again, I think I would hope that our information from the brain can guide us in some sense there. Like humans do have a natural, evolutionary, what's the word? Preference towards collaboration and compassion and kindness. And, like we see humans very often in the worst case scenarios being highly compassionate and highly giving, and that should come from some form of cognition. So I think there's potential there to try and take inspiration for what has led humans to, on the average and on the most part, be highly, highly caring about each other. There is obviously then the distinction that, like, perhaps that is a human to human thing. And we have now created this other, this big AI that we feel less compassion towards, and that introduces something into the dynamic. So it's hard to, it's hard to say exactly how that's going to go. My personal opinion, if I was going to, be clear on this AI safety idea, is again, I think what we're looking at more is the fact that our current systems are not ready for highly intelligent AI agents. Not necessarily, AGI is one thing, and that is scary and unpredictable. And, I think most highly intelligent researchers on Earth are raising concerns about that. Jeffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner, being one of them. Um, I would say that what we need to first understand is, when AI is starting to take jobs, what are those new jobs that people are shifting into? That is, most industrial revolutions have people shift into new jobs, and there is the way that this can go where that happens again, and that'd be fantastic. That's like this utopian direction, and in that case, we will then follow a path towards starting to have to consider AGI. But we'll get through the first, 5, 10, 20 years of having AI more in our societies but it's still not general intelligence and still not kind of a societal danger. Um, but yeah, I think there's many questions like, unemployment, universal basic income, those sorts of things there, and even just the disproportionate access to these technologies that we have to grapple with. I mean, it's one thing to say that like AI is revolutionizing healthcare at the moment in many ways as well, and And again, it's a very active area of research, but it's disproportionately distributed because they're just so energy intense, right? Like that's their biggest weakness right now is that
Yeah.
LLMs and these models in general just take huge amounts of power. That's not accessible to many third world countries, if any, right? And so I think those are going to be the things that maybe push us in bad directions first. Is when we don't again solve the fundamental societal problems, and then we release AI that helps take those problems to scale. Now
Yeah.
you're in a problem, but not because the AI is deliberately attacking you or doing something nefarious, just because it's actually just taking the existing problems we don't have answers to a scale that we won't kind of cope with.
You're a lecturer and you are an advocate of AI at the same time. And AI has disrupted the education space. In what ways has that impacted
Okay.
education?
Yeah, sure thing. So I mean, um, I guess to say that I'm advocate of AI, I guess I would advocate for AI a little bit more specifically than that. I don't think I'm an advocate for AI in every space of community and society.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think AI in education is something that I am for. And in that sense, I think the most obvious one, and we've already seen this in my classes because a lot of my students are allowed in certain settings to use AI for their assessments. Um, I've found that students one of the problems that we've never really figured out in academic assessment is how to disentangle clarity in language and clarity in thought. And I mean, that is such a fundamental question. Again, it's an example of maybe what I was saying earlier, which is we don't have answers to a lot of very meaningful questions, and all AI is doing is just taking that to scale. So I would say that that was one problem that we never had an answer to, that AI has helped because now most students have access to something that can give them clarity in writing, but the clarity in thought then shows through, or at least that's the differentiator. So there is a case now where we need to update how we assess things. We can't be assessing our students based purely on their writing or
Yeah.
based just on the kind of clarity of their writing, because that's no longer a good signal of understanding because ChatGPT can help you there, or LLMs can help you there. But in that case, many of my students who, their academic language is not the same as their first language. You know what I mean? They do
Yeah.
not speak, let's say, English at home, but they're being taught in anything, the language they're most fluent in for academic concepts is English. Um, those students are having a boost because now they don't have this tension and clarity of writing. And it turns out their ideas are fantastic. And so in that sense, that has, I think, been a huge help to many students who were clearly being under rewarded by the system before that. And another example is I think a lot of when we come to education, we bring a lot of our own, knowledge and ideas, and especially at the level that I teach, honors and master students, a lot of students in
Yeah.
my class could probably teach me a course on something that I have no notion of with, right? Like we were speaking before this, I haven't gone to industry. Most of my students are working and actually doing high powered or high level jobs in industry, right? So we're all bringing
Yeah.
our own knowledge and quite in depth knowledge to topics. And so my job as a lecturer is to try and tailor what I'm saying or align it as best I can to specific people in my class, right? And so hopefully when you're giving a lecture, 80% of people resonate with a similar direction in how I'm explaining it. But there's that still 20% that would benefit from a more specific or more kind of tailored way of explanation. Now, they can ask questions and we can kind of try and align. And again, that's my job. But AI has actually been useful in that. AI is actually good at taking content and repositioning it or realigning it to a different metaphor, let's say, using a different example that resonates more. And, again, I think that's very, very helpful. So I think this
Wow.
this general, sorry to make it a long answer, but I
No.
think this general trend of enabling students to present their own ideas and then
Yeah.
allowing me to also approach them where they are is, I think, going to be a very big thing in education. I'm very excited to kind of explore those directions as well.
Wow, I liked the pros and cons on AI because most of the times you hear almost like people saying that AI has affected education in a way that they're getting AI written assignments, but the way you have explained it, something that is added value to the education sector. And there's somewhere where they talk about you are actually you work with African medical students. One Day Africa, that's
Yeah,
your
correct.
organization, right? So what is One Day Africa,
Not
and
not
what does
my
it?
organization.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
all right, I can elaborate a little bit. So One Day
Yeah.
Suno was a company that was started in the US by a person named Joshua Morrison. I think he's a Harvard Law School graduate and kind of had already started I think like kidney transplant related foundations before that. So it was started by, someone who had a long history of starting foundations, and it was pretty much geared towards the pandemic at the time, and it gained a lot of traction. It was on CNN, and I think it's that new initial news coverage that it got as being one way that someone was trying to like very deliberately create community and tackle COVID a little bit more head on, really resonated with a lot of people globally. And so it became this advocacy agency for what was called human challenge trials for COVID in particular. So challenge trials have a rich ethics in them. Essentially, the idea is when you deliberately expose a human to the disease you would like to study in a very safe, contained, monitored environment, and then use that as a way to test vaccines. So you give someone a vaccine, they wait for about a week or two, then you put them in this facility and you expose them directly to the disease. Again, it's certainly not something that you would do in all cases. There is a huge amount of, ethical guardrails and stuff like that. And for those reasons, people weren't kind of considering them for COVID. But at the time, given the kind of rapid spread of COVID, but also the fact that there was a fairly high survival rate, there was this kind of agenda of this organization that they felt that it was worth considering, and they advocated for that. And again, they had like this huge amount of people internationally all agreeing to be the trial subjects, like pretty much like a whole bunch of people between ages of 18 and 35 all put their hands up internationally saying no, they wanted to be the ones to take that risk for their communities to speed up research. And again, I think it was quite an inspiring thing. Anyway, from that, I volunteered, and then they have a process that if you volunteer, they do an interview, and if you want to be more involved in advocacy, you can be. And I followed that track. And then after about a year, it turned out that, they were making a lot of progress. They decided to make some chapters a little bit more regional and specific. I was one of the African volunteers, and then particularly a man named Zachariah Kafuko, who is a Mandela Washington Fellow, and again, kind of also quite successful in his own right, or very successful in his own right. He decided to lead the chapter, and he asked if I would help. So I came on board as the research lead, and Zachariah and I did a little bit of work trying to start this African chapter, and it took on a life of its own. I think Zachariah has, published quite a few opinion pieces about African medicine broadly, but but one of the things that we did that I ran with was this kind of mentorship series throughout African universities. We for example, we did WITS, we had Makerere University and a handful of others that partnered with us to kind of just start engaging with students and trying to give them a like an online format series where they were receiving mentorship from people that they usually wouldn't. And there was just tons of buy-in, and it was just very, very well received. And again, during a time during the pandemic where people were online,
Yeah.
and that was kind of perceived as a negative, it became a way of also making like online community. And I think there was that double-edged sword of it was a very unifying aspect for a lot of medical students across Africa to not feel alone while they're doing an extremely challenging degree, to then also
Yeah.
meet a bunch of new people and gain colleagues. And then also it was enriching, I think, because we managed to get some very good mentors involved and have some really informative series and stuff like that. So that was my role in it. I'm not involved anymore. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time, but I still chat to Zachariah quite often.
So you mentioned that you spent some time in UK, right? I just wanna. I think before we started recording, you spoke about the difference in the education between the UK and South Africa. What are those major differences that you noticed?
Yeah, and I mean I think I can say in quite a positive sense that they're not exactly where you would expect them to be, right? Like or at least
Yeah.
maybe from my own biases, not where they would be, right? So it wasn't a case of where like South Africans are behind or slower, or our education is worse. In fact, I think you're looking at not just WITS, but the top universities across South Africa are actually reaching international levels of lecturing, content delivery, and stuff like that. Particularly, I would say at like an undergrad honors level. Really, I think we are world class in those respects, and certainly when I was at the Gatsby unit, like that is, I wasn't one of the PhD that's there. I was a visiting researcher, but I engaged quite closely with the PhDs who were my friends and stuff, and you know, I didn't. There wasn't an enormous gap. They are the most talented people some of the most talented people I've ever met. They were amazing, but it wasn't a case of like I was completely out of my depth being in a room with them. And I think to me that was, you know, just firstly, that was super enriching, right? And I think I didn't know when I was going into the space. You know, the Gatsby unit within my field is famous again for people like Jeffrey Hinton and Demis Hassabis, Dr. Demis Hassabis, who founded DeepMind. They're all
Mm.
alumni of that institute. So I went in with, you know, kind of lofty ideas, and I was very, very enamored with the space, and pleasantly surprised to see that I could fit in, you know, and I could
Wow.
have my
Yeah.
own, you know, capacity to contribute in those spaces. And again, like I said before, I think that's, to me, that's what I want to bring back, is these ideas that you can contribute if you've come through an African university or a South African university at least. Um, you are at a level where you can contribute internationally, and it's just about looking for those opportunities. But to answer your question directly, so, you know, it's not that. It's not quality. Where it is I think more on an administrative level, and the way we speak to each other about what we're doing. You know, postgraduate studies in Africa and South Africa in particular, at least I can speak to, is very you know, when you're a PhD student, you're considered a student, right? And
Yeah.
you don't really get paid stipends or salaries and stuff like that. Whereas in that space in the UK, and again, because it's also a very prestigious PhD program to be in, you know,
All
those
right.
students are, that's all they do. They don't have to work to support themselves. They get paid to be there, and they are appreciated for the research they do. Like, you know, even the other professors in that space speak to them as if they are contributing and can make a breakthrough at any time, you know. And so there's this way of communicating in that space and in that community that is very respectful, and very recognizes the key role that the student is playing in it. And I think, to me, that's maybe something South Africa is not as good at, especially not at like a PhD level. Certainly
Yeah.
within, again, my lab, Richard's lab, Benji's lab, there are spaces where those ideas are setting in, but it's not institutional yet. It's not a case where every PhD student is now treated as if they can make international academic contributions. Um, and again, so one of the things that I really want to start doing here is
Yeah.
trying to get more of this PhD funding, trying to make sure that this is what
Yeah.
the talented students in South Africa are spending their time on all day. You know, they're not having to work a software development job so that they can do a PhD at night. You know, I don't think that's going to bring out the best in their research, unless they want to. If they want to, they obviously still
It
can. But
it
those
possibly
opportunities.
will. It possibly will. It will possibly add value to them. I think it's a good idea if they can get funding. So I wanted to touch how your students are getting prepared for work readiness. Right.
Hmm,
I don't
hmm.
know which level of students are you lecturing, but I'm assuming that they're almost completing their university. But how are they prepared for work readiness? Why I asked that question is, an employer, we have had situations where we have students coming out of university, and what they've learned and what is practically needed in the industry is two different things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. So I am teaching third year algorithm and a third year algorithms class now, and again, I teach honors and masters. So all of my students are at an exit level at various levels. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's something we speak about a lot, because I think we recognize that there is a tension there that does land on us as the lecturer, right? So number one, we are there to also instill the capacity. There are skills that we want our students to leave with, rather than necessarily just a set of content that they must know. And I think that's firstly the subtle difference that you maybe only really start to appreciate the distinction once you're actually teaching and lecturing. And even then, I think I'm still very much learning how to calibrate between those two at the moment. Um, so what we kind of tend to say is we equip the students with the ability to learn whatever skill they need to in their subsequent work. And to us, that is, you know, work readiness to a degree. Um, However, I think there is also a trend where, by the nature of the fact that, you know, we're academics, right? Like, I find particular
Yeah.
questions interesting. I bring myself to the lecture. it's very difficult to disentangle that. I mean, again, I think a mature lecturer, and this is arguably the distinction between a lecturer and a professor, is how well you separate yourself, your own kind of feelings about the content from that content. You know what I mean? So I'm lucky. A lot of what I lecture is what I also like to research. So, for example, natural language processing. I like working on doing research in African language processing and stuff like that. So, in that sense, it's a little bit easier. But I must also recognize that most of my students in that class are not going to be going and working on that directly. They're learning about language models, so that they can perhaps be better at using LLMs, and integrating LLMs into ML pipelines. They're not there because they want to understand the fundamentals of what's going on, like within each of the kind of deep layers of this machine. And so those are two different things. And so there is a tension there. It's something that I have to try and balance. How we're doing this is, again, I think we're just having those discussions. I try and be very deliberate in getting feedback from my students. And as a
Uh-huh.
culture, WITS is getting better at that. There's a big push now, I think, at WITS to have these discussions with students at the end of a course for lecturers to learn and improve. And that's a really positive step. So that's happening. Um, and yeah, I think it is also then about engaging with industry and engaging with the communities a little bit more broadly and saying, like, well, are we teaching the things that are useful to you? um, with the recognition that what I'm also trying to do is make sure that PhD or students who want to go on to do a PhD at Oxford can, you know what I mean? So that's a very different
Yeah.
content that they need to know compared to the people who want to go into, maybe industry in South Africa and stuff like that. So there's a lot of needs that we need to cater towards, and I think understanding the different pockets of students and trying to make sure that we create spaces for all of them. So even if they're not getting that information from Devon, they may be getting that information from each other. Maybe they're getting that information from the internships that we facilitate. I think there are many, many ways for a student to accumulate that knowledge. And I think what really this comes down to is a recognition that a course is one thing. It has its own set of assessments and criteria, and we try our best to make it relevant. But fundamentally, universities just need to be spaces of learning, and they need to facilitate many avenues to learn. And again, I
Mm.
think that is something that can also be improved on. It's something that there's more of that culture, I would say, overseas than here. I think people come to university very much to take the courses, study, and then go with their degree. And there are, I think, societal reasons for that. I'm not going to say that that's unreasonable, but I think
Yeah.
creating this idea that a university is the space to learn and gain the skills you want, and there are many paths through that, and us facilitating that is really one of the best ways to do it.
I want to ask another question in terms of you did computer science, right? And then you're leading the research group that is cognition, adaptation, and learning, right? So
Correct. Yeah,
with
yeah.
all these new schools of thought that are coming in the neuroscience and cognition, how is it adding value to coding? Do the students come out with a new set of skills that possibly a student that came out of university 5 years ago who did computer science, they are different or at different levels? How does it work?
Yeah, so I mean, I think at that level, so that those are at most, or sorry, at minimum master students, so masters and PhD students in the group, along with some of my colleagues in the faculty. Um, so I mean, I guess coding skills wise, they're all pretty amazing coders and computer scientists in their own right at that level. I think what this lab and the need for this lab is again, it's there to be more informed by the brain and neuroscience. And again, when I spent some time in London learning those techniques and learning those skills. And so for me, this lab is me bringing those ideas back into the space. Um, and so I think those are the skills, or that is the contribution that brings to our community, our academic community, is that now we can start to engage in these discussions that happen at the intersection of neuroscience and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And again, I am a believer that that is going to be a very rich area based on the history of machine learning. Um, but also, I think that it also just opens up a lot of spaces for collaboration and impactful work, right? So in that
Yeah.
sense, we collaborate quite a lot with like doctors and medical schools. We collaborate a lot with psychologists. We try and work on things like cognition of language, that we understand how to address maybe developmental disorders in children with language and things like that. So um, it's bringing new academic ideas into the space. Certainly, at least that's my goal with it. particularly theory side of machine learning and computational neuroscience, and Neuro-AI, which I think are not topics that are prevalent in Africa in general.
No.
But and I
No.
think but again, I would suggest that maybe if the people coming through my lab are specializing, they're specialists in that space, and they're not coming through my lab because they want to be more productive, in industry afterwards. These are people who want to maybe stay in academia or want to be actually research positions at a place like maybe DeepMind and stuff like that, and or InstaDeep is a South African example. So I think that they're
Yeah.
looking to go more into research jobs within our tech sector.
Yeah. And then talking about your large learning models, um, in your research, have there been any discussions of South African or an African based large learning model?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so Professor Benjamin Rosman from Wits and Dr. Pravesh Ranchard, uh, doc, I want to get all the names right. Professor Vukosi
Yeah.
Maravati, and a handful of others. I think you mentioned Vukosi. Um,
Yeah.
they've started a company called Lapa AI, and I have omitted a few names there. And my apologies, but yeah. So the Lapa AI is probably our leading African language model company in South Africa. They're a little bit at the moment, I think, industry facing from an outsider view. That's what I can see. They're also hiring immensely at the moment. They're doing very, very well. So
Uh,
they're growing enormously, and they have an African language LLM that is, again, I think tailored a little bit more to providing an API for downstream services in industry. But I can't tell you what they're going to do, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a more um, community or like general LLM that they make available in the future.
oh, that's amazing. Anyway, let's talk about. I think as I mentioned, this quote from Gandalf Grey. What does it mean to you?
Yeah.
All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple maybe interpretations of that. I find it calming. I guess it's like all we have to do, and I guess people like me and in my spaces, we want to solve problems, and
Yeah.
it's um it's very plausible that you just take on too much. You want to solve everyone's problems all the time, and so I think this idea that there is a budget of time, and all I have to do is decide on what's going to do that. That's going to be most impactful in the long run. And so it's also almost like reminds me that taking breaks and resting is a part of the process. You know what I mean? And so like avoiding burnout and stuff like that. So like all I have to do is decide to do with what time I have. Maybe this is just the time to sleep, or it's the time to study, or it's the time to work. But that's all I have to do. I have to just decide what I'm doing at each time, and then almost have a degree of trust that it goes places and it makes a difference. Again, I think also in academia, sometimes the time scales that we're working at are slightly longer than you would like. And again, if you want to
Yeah.
solve a problem, academia, we do a lot of research, especially in my work. I do very fundamental work that is quite in a lot of cases far away from practical ML. Um, but I am confident, and I have seen it happen over at least the span of the last 5 years, where some of the work I do does inform practical ML, and it does lead somewhere beneficial, across an academic community. So, I think it's also just a trust that like those considerations and those things are not necessarily up to me. It's you just have to do the work, do what's appropriate at the time, and let things kind of play out as best you can. But as long as you approach it with right intentions, then it should be fun.
Definitely. Do you see yourself maybe leaving education to business, or you're gonna stick to education?
So I mean, I certainly don't see myself leaving academia, or
Mm.
research. I think there's obviously cases, again, like I've pointed to Lalapa AI that spun out of a university context, and there's been multiple, many highly impactful businesses internationally have all spun out of academic contexts, right? I mean, I think the most famous hedge fund in the world came out of a math professor from MIT. While he was just doing his research, he kind of found something that was applicable. So I'm always on the lookout for good opportunities, and I think with the day I find or I'm exposed to an idea that I think would be best utilized in a commercial space, certainly I would, pursue that, and I would pursue it to the best of my ability. But again, I think as we said earlier, I think teaching and leveraging the kind of more public sectory side of a university to create spaces is something that I enjoy and I find very, very impactful. So I don't think I'd leave academia, but certainly I would diversify if I can put it that way.
Oh, okay, cool. You know what, Devon, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, but I've got one more question that I wanted to understand. Since you're a researcher in AI, do you have any insights on the future of AI in South Africa?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, certainly we're seeing many, many people coming into the space, and I think that's going to continue out of need. We can't fall behind. Um, I think South Africa is kind of primed for in the next few years a really big but also unique adoption of technology. Again, I think because we're somewhat separated, it is allows us a degree of freedom in how we approach problems. And again, I think there are many, many ideas coming out of African communities that will lead to different deployments of resources, let's say, and how we actually use the technology to our benefit. And I'm very excited to see what an AI and a machine learning kind of revolution within a more African space actually looks like. Because I think it will look different to how it's currently.
Yeah, wow. Quite inspiring. Thank you for the conversation. And I think I didn't do justice to, there's a list of achievements here. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to TechMark Pod. Talking of Dr. Devon, I think some of his achievements and they are listed. He received his PhD in 2025. Congratulations for that. You were named the founding fellow of the Machine Intelligence and Neuro Discovery Institute of WITS in 2025. Secured an NRF Tutuka grant in 2024. Awarded the Commonwealth Scholarship in 2023. Awarded the Google PhD Fellowship in 2022. And then, of course, you founded the Cognition, Adaptation and Learning. And that was inspired by your time you spent in London. Right. No, this is quite inspiring, Devon. Thank you everyone for watching TechMark Pod. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode. See you in the next episode.